In this week's video, we're going to talk about repeating ourselves. Doing that in Java or most programming languages, we use something called a loop. And specifically, in this week's video, we're going to talk about a for loop, which is a specific type of loop. So if we want to do something once, we obviously just write the program to do that. But if we want to do this same thing 3 times, we have 2 options. We can just copy and paste that same code 2 more times, or we can put it in a loop. And a loop is a structured way to tell Java, I want to repeat this line of code 3 times or however many times we want. And a loop is a lot better than just repeating ourselves. One is, in this case, what if we make a mistake? Well, we have to fix it on all 3 lines of code. And that's not ideal. We want to just fix things once. The second problem is that this is a really simple line of code. Typically, when we're repeating things, we'll repeat chunks of code. There might be 10 or 20 or 50 lines that we want to repeat. Copying and pasting 20 lines 3 times is really not ideal. And another thing, what if we don't want to repeat it 3 times? What if we want to repeat it 15 times? Well, that gets really unwieldy. And there's one thing this can't do. What if sometimes we want it to print high 3 times, and sometimes we want it to print high 15 times? That's going to take a lot of really difficult if statements that are going to be really easy to mess up. Instead, we want to use something called a for loop. And a for loop, the idea is basically, I want to do something here. I want to print line high. And then, instead of continuing on with the program, I want to loop back. I want to create this little thing where I repeat what I've done there. And I want to repeat that a certain number of times. And when I'm done, then I continue on to the rest of the code. So what we've seen before was an if or an if-else, where we did something or we didn't do something. In this case, we're creating a loop, where we do something a certain number of times. So let's see the basic layout of how our program can do this using a loop. If we want to do something 3 times, we need to keep track of how many times we've done it so far. So we're going to call that counter, and we're going to set it equal to 1. This will be 1 the first time we display high on the screen. And we want to keep displaying high on the screen as long as counter is less than or equal to 3. So if it's 1, 2, or 3, then we want to display high on the screen. We're displaying it either the first, the second, or the third time. If counter is more than 3, if it goes up to 4, that would be the 4th time we're displaying high on the screen. We don't want to do that. We'll continue with the rest of the code. So if counter is less than or equal to 3, we'll display high on the screen. We'll increment counter. Counter plus plus just means add 1 to the value. So if it was 1, now it's 2. If it was 2, it becomes 3, and so on. And then we'll go back up to that less than or equal statement. So if counter is 2 now, 2 is less than or equal to 3, we'll display high on the screen again, and we'll add 1 to counter. Now counter is 3. 3 is less than or equal to 3, we'll display high again, we'll add 1 to counter, now it's 4. 4 is not less than or equal to 3, so we hit our condition. It's false. We'll continue with the rest of the code. What we're going to see as we look at the for loop is that we're going to run into this pattern a lot. We're going to have a counter. We're going to start it at 1. We're going to say that counter is less than or equal to however many times I want to repeat my code. Then we're going to do something and then add 1 to the counter. So the only real thing that's changing in our for loops is that that condition will change. Instead of counter less than or equal to 3, if we want to do this 10 times, it'll be counter less than or equal to 10. If we want to do it 100 times, it's counter less than or equal to 100, and so on. And the other thing that's changing is the body. What do we do each time through the loop? Right now we're displaying high, but maybe we'll want to do something else, something more complicated in a different loop. The rest of the loop is basically the same. Counter equals 1 as a starting point, counter plus plus as what's called the update. That's how we just add 1 to counter every time. And because this is so common, there's something designed exactly for this called a for loop. So we write it in this way. For counter equals 1, counter is less than 3, counter plus plus. And we put semicolons actually inside this statement. We'll never see any other code in Java where we have semicolons inside this statement like we do here. But it's splitting up the initialization that counter equals 1, the condition counter is less than or equal to 3, and the update counter plus plus. So those 3 things determine how the loop runs. We can look at this one line of code and say this is going to run 3 times. Then inside the braces is our body of our loop. What do we want to do 3 times? In this case, we're just displaying the word high. and then we have a closing brace at the end. So the basic structure of our for loop is almost always the same, and to help us define that, we give each of these pieces a name. Counter equals 1, that's our initialization. That's our setup to get the for loop started. Counter is less than or equal to 3, that's our condition, just like an if statement. That's asking us, do I continue the for loop? If this is true, counter is less than or equal to 3, then I continue our for loop. I do the body again. If it's not, then we're done with the for loop and we go on to the rest of the code. Print line high, that's the body of the loop. That's the actual thing that I'm repeating. And then the counter plus plus is called the update. So with those terms, you can view the general structure of a for loop as for, and then in parentheses, initialization, semicolon, conditions, semicolon, update. The close paren, and then inside the braces goes the body of the loop. So let's see our for loop in action. Let's move the outline to the side and see some code. We've got the for loop that we had before and just a print line before and after the loop so we can see how that'll work. First, our program just starts at the beginning and we print out the for loop on the screen. When we get to our for loop, the first thing it does is the initialization. This just happens once in our program at the very beginning of the loop, and it sets counter equal to 1. In this case, I've actually added int counter equals 1. That'll create the variable and set it equal to 1 at the same time. But we could be using a variable that we had already created beforehand, so we would just say counter equals 1 in that case. So the initialization happens, that just happens once the entire loop. And then we check the condition. 1 is less than or equal to 3, so we'll do the body of the loop. We'll print high. When we hit the close brace, we do the update, and then the condition. So now counter is 2. 2 is less than or equal to 3. That's still true, so we repeat the body of our loop. We get to the close brace. We do our update. Counter becomes 3. 3 is less than or equal to 3 still, so we'll display high on the screen. We hit the close brace again. We do the update. Counter becomes 4. 4 is less than or equal to 3. That's not true, so we're done. So we got into the details of that quite a bit, running each line at a time, but you can see it exactly follows the pattern on the right. First we do the initialization, then we do the condition. If the condition's true, we do the body, the update, and the condition again. If the condition's true, we do the body, the update, and the condition again. And we'll repeat that until the condition is false, where we'll run the rest of the code. Let's look at a few variations, how we might change our for loop. So this example has counter is less than or equal to happy level as the condition. The initialization step, counter equals 1, and the update, counter plus plus, are the exact same as we had before. But the condition depends on some other variable. So maybe we got a happy level from the user as input, maybe we did some calculation. But in this case, what will happen is it will repeat the body of the for loop however many times happy level is. So if happy level is 5, it'll print out 5 smiley faces on the screen. If happy level is 100, it will display 100 smiley faces on the screen. So we can use that condition. We can use some variable. It doesn't have to be a built-in constant. It doesn't have to be 5 or 10 or 100. It can be a variable like happy level to determine how many times this for loop will repeat. Let's look at what happens if we change our initialization and our update spots. So this for loop starts with counter equals 2. Our condition is pretty typical. Counter is less than or equal to 10. But the update is no longer counter plus plus. It's counter plus equals 2. So instead of adding 1 every time, we're adding 2 to the counter every time. So let's see it in action. First, we'll start with this line. We'll do the initialization step. So we create the variable counter. We set it equal to 2. The condition, 2 is less than or equal to 10, so we'll display 2 on the screen. We hit the end of our for loop, so we go to the update. Counter is now 4. 4 is less than or equal to 10, so we'll display 4 on the screen. We hit the end of our loop. We go back. Counter plus equals 2. Counter is now 6. 6 is less than or equal to 10, so we display 6 on the screen. So what you're catching on to, hopefully, is that this is displaying all the even numbers up to 10. We're starting at 2, then 4, then 6, and if we continue this, it would go to 8 and 10 and display all the even numbers on the screen up to the number 10. Another variation here is if the condition is never true. So again, remember, we do our initialization step, so we'll say counter equals 1, and then we do the condition, counter is greater than 5. That's not true, so we'll just skip to the rest of the code. So a for loop does not have to ever run the body in the update. It's possible that the very first time the condition will be false and we'll just skip to the rest of the code.